Before we get into the episode, future Tyler and Jay here would like to just come with a quick announcement about our audio.
So we are aware of it in that my wife has told me there's a problem. I happen to be tone deaf and edit the podcast. If audio issues do bother you, please skip ahead to episode 8 where we get a new setup.
Yes, new microphones, new setup, new everything. Audio is much better, and I think it'll be a much more enjoyable listen. So please bear with us. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the episode.
All right, so welcome back to our Gilmore Girls podcast. This is Oi with the Pod.
already?
Oi with the Pod already, which we were still settling on a name on our first episode. I think we called it Oi with the References already.
I think we did. I think we did.
So
We're here. We figured it out.
We're going to own that. We're working on it. So this is a podcast that we talk all things Gilmore Girls in kind of a not rewatch, but we are watching the episodes, reference kind of our thoughts, conglomerate of all things.
Yeah, super fans know how much this permeates your life and how you are constantly thinking about all the things that happen in Gilmore Girls, and this is the place that we're going to do that. We're going to think about just everything that happens. And this episode will be an example of our too muchness.
I have so many questions in so many issues with one of the references in particular.
Yeah.
And we're going to spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah, so the amount of too muchness. So we're going to give you amazing facts. We're going to give you things to think about. We're just going to give you a lot.
We're going to be educational. Everyone's favorite thing in the world is to just sit down and learn, right?
If you're a Rory Gilmore, it is.
Well,
so
applicable then.
Exactly, applicable. We are in it. So if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe to this podcast. Make sure that it downloads for you, all of that, because we're going to be giving you more information and content than I think any other Gilmore Girls podcast has done, if I do say so myself. So do you want to get right into this episode? We got a lot to talk about.
Let's get started. Starting off, we left off last pod talking about Lane and Woodstock 99, and kind of that was her defining identity for the entire show. It to me seemed like that was one of the few things that they did that actually stuck from the first episode. Like, Suki was not nearly as clumsy, and there's a lot of changes that happened in the show, but that was one that stuck, and I think because it was her entire identity.
Yeah, so that's where we left off. I do want to give kind of an orientation of where we are, because we are still in the pilot, and we are making our way
forever
through it.
On the pilot.
This episode of the podcast is going to cover approximately between minute 7:30 in the pilot through 18:10, just to give you some context, and to let you know, like, what's kind of happening in the episode at this point. As he said, we're going to start off where Lane and Rory are kind of talking about Woodstock 99 and talking about the hay rides and talking about all of that. Future doctors. Yep. We're then going to be talking about Huck Finn because they go into the school and we have Rory there. After that, we see the letter from Chilton and how excited they are that Rory has gotten into Chilton. And then we find out that Chilton is too expensive. So that's basically where we're at within this episode, and we'll go through each part. But just kind of wanted to give you an orientation because this is a little bit different than the rewatch podcast. We're not doing episode by episode, so
yeah, we're going to be covering the first episode for the next forever. It feels like
the rest of our lives. And since you brought up Lane, and that's where we're starting, I did want to just mention. I'm sure superfans know, but if you didn't, that Lane is based off of Amy Sherman Palladino's friend, as well as the writer-producer of the show, Helen Pye. So she's going to come up later in this because there's more references to her. I don't know if you can guess yet, but there's more, and I won't spoil it, but there's more. And yeah, so I think that's really cool that she incorporates a lot of her friends and personal life into the show, and we're doing that in the podcast. So, like, we're like a lot alike, you know? So
the first reference we have for this new episode is going to be Huck Finn, where Rory is in class doing an assignment on Huck Finn. Which for me that seemed a little bit odd because she seemed a little bit old to be reading Huck Finn because I remember it from like 6th grade, maybe like 5th grade. Like I was a young child at the time.
I've never read it, so I did watch the Spark Notes for this podcast. Does that count?
No, because I was under the impression that everyone read it for school. I thought that was a requirement to.
When you're doing English as your your pinnacle of school, you get some leeway on what you read, and Huck Finn wasn't top of my list.
I mean, to be fair, I could be misremembering because I do very much like to read, and I was a very, very big reader when I was a child. So I read significantly more than that was required in school. So it could have been something that I had picked up just to read in my own time.
Makes sense. I read quite a bit too as a kid.
You didn't read Huck Finn.
I even tried the Rory Gilmore book club back when it was just a website online. My mother actually bought me books off the list because she buys me books every year for Christmas, and they were usually Rory Gilmore book club books because I really wanted to read that all. And I learned very quickly that I don't necessarily have the taste in books that the show did. I love books. I love reading, but some of those books are intense. So we'll get into those, but this isn't one that I actually picked up. Before you get into like the whole reference, I do think we should mention why we think this is relevant, especially for the pilot. So Huck Finn is written by Mark Twain.
Yes.
I think everyone knew that. I don't know, maybe not. So, but the reason this is really relevant for the beginning of the show is Mark Twain kind of inspired the show. Can I say that? Is that
I think that's
fair?
Well, I think that's fair to say. You found this. I had never heard about this because I'm not nearly as involved as you are.
I didn't know until I was researching for this episode. I knew that Amy Sherman Palladino had gone to Connecticut and had been inspired by the small towns, but I didn't know why, and I found out researching for this episode. So there's actually a quote from her, and I'm going to read that. So here's the quote from Amy. It says, "We had just bought a house, old creaky house, and we were decorating it. Kid you not. We were kind of obsessed with the shit that Mark Twain did in his house, so we were like, let's fly to Mark Twain's house because it's creaky. So we went to Connecticut and we stayed at this inn, and it was October leafing season. People were pulling us over going, excuse me, do you know which way the pumpkin patch is? I'm like, are you shitting me? I come from the valley where everything's like, hey, there's another pharmacy. So we went back to the inn, and the concierge was a French woman, and went up to the room, and I said to my husband, what if I place a show like here, like in this place? He goes, sure, why not? I sat down, I got out my pad from a hotel, and I literally wrote the first scene of Gilmore Girls on the pad. The inn is called the Mayflower. It's gotten fancier now. So that's how she like came to be writing Gilmore Girls, which I think is really amazing, and I just needed to get that out there.
So we've actually been to the Mark Twain house because it's about an hour and a half from where we live, and I don't know
why.
Well, I'm blaming you for this because I'm convinced now, and there's no denying it, that you wanted to go to see the Mark Twain house because of this show, and I will die on that hill. I will stand by what I say.
I mean, it's possible, but it must have been subconscious because I'm pretty sure we were like driving home. It could have been from Washington Depot, which is one of the towns that this show is inspired by, because we went there multiple times. It could be driving home from there. Could have been driving home from New York. Or could have been driving home from Virginia because we vacationed there. I don't know, but we were driving home for
It's on the way back from a lot of places that we would want to go. Philadelphia even.
Yeah. We just decided to stop in.
I think we just found it randomly because we were getting ice cream.
Yeah, that could be. There's a pretty good ice cream place near there.
But no, we went in, and it's, for those of you who don't know, Mark Twain married up. He was not the rich one. His wife was the rich one, and it shows. It's a beautiful house. It's enormous. It's a mansion. It's a mansion in Hartford.
Yeah, but Amy went there because she was decorating. Now, would you go there for decorating advice? I'm just wondering.
I mean, if you want the turn of the century 1800s style decor and the old colonial look, then yes. Because
do I?
Well, I don't. New England is that, for everyone who's never been here. It is all of where the history in the country is, basically. All of it. So yeah, old buildings, they're everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've seen Emily Dickinson's house. I've seen all these others. So to me, it's not out of the realm of like what I've seen before. But I am curious. There's some rumors on the internet that what she was particularly looking for was wallpaper. And I kind of gone through the photos online. Spoilers, you cannot take photos within the house. We don't have any of that. We do have some from outside that we could share. But there is some from inside the house online. And I've kind of scrolled through them to be like, what wallpaper do I think she'd pick? And I really don't know. Because I gotta say, they're gaudy. They're just not...
Yeah. Well, they're Victorian. They're old, out of date. I mean... Getting back on track, Mark Twain is basically the same sarcastic person that Lorelai is.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, they're basically the same person. He said, I have a mug from the Mark Twain house that says, "Suppose you're an idiot and suppose you're a member of Congress." But then again, I repeat myself.
Yes, he is
So
very
he's
snarky.
very, very much a sarcastic person. So it fits very nicely within the framework of the show. One thing I don't think you have written down for Mark Twain, Huck Finn specifically, is that Huck Finn is basically Jess.
Okay, interesting. Explain.
So he doesn't really have a whole lot of parental figures in his life. He lives on his own, by his own rules, and travels a lot and gets into adventures. And it's very much kind of Jack Kerouac on the road. It's just the traveler. Now, he doesn't read as much, but that's where it breaks down for me. But they're very much the same kind of adventurous, wandering person.
Interesting. So I have not read Huck Finn, but I did watch the Cliff Notes, which they have video now, and it's in cartoon form. So if anybody wants to do that, that's wonderful. But what I wrote down here was a part of it that struck me where it said, there was a quote that says, "Stop trying to be better than your father." And they were referencing the fact that he was reading and writing and trying to learn and become smarter than where he came from.
Yes.
And I was curious if you thought that maybe that was put in this part of the show because they show Rory at a desk and she's doing the assignment and all the people around her are making fun of her for doing the assignment because she's clearly trying to better herself and get to a place where her mother couldn't get to.
She's a bookworm student, teacher's pet, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, but she's trying to get to somewhere her mother couldn't get to. Now, it's arguable whether or not her mother could have gotten to, but we'll get to that in some other portion of the show. But we learn later in this episode that she is going to Chilton. She's going to be better than these kids who are making fun of her. And I was just wondering if they might have been making kind of a connection there.
I mean, that could be that. It also ties into my comparison to Jess because he's trying to better himself because his dad wasn't in the picture, which is very similar to Huck Finn's father, who's a good-for-nothing alcoholic, and he's learning to be better than that himself. So I think it carries through multiple character arcs and multiple people you can reference.
So it's a multi-layered reference.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what other people think. So definitely share with us in email or Instagram or whatever what you think and why you think this is the first ever actual book referenced in the show, because it's got to be relevant, right?
Yeah.
And one quick thing before we move past it, even though it's tangentially related now, but we were talking about how she's inspired by Connecticut. That's how Amy became interested in writing the show. I just wanted to state that I found out that she named Stars Hollow because of Mia Farrow's estate in Connecticut called Frogs Hollow. So just wanted to make sure I get that out there because I did not know that, and I just find that fascinating.
All right. So the next reference we have is going to be a slam book, which is straight out of childhood.
See, now is it? So I had questions about this because first of all, this is the first reference in this episode that I really felt was dated. So there's been a bunch of lists out there of the most dated references in each episode of the show, and this does not make the top of the list in most ones, but for me, I heard that and I was like, wow, that's super dated. And I don't know, after researching exactly what a slam book is, that outside of like Mean Girls and the Burn book, that I've ever even heard of a slam book.
So it's similar to that. Basically, it's a blank notebook where a kid will ask a question and then pass it around to all of their classmates to have their anonymous responses. And it did kind of turn into this horrible picking on kids and bullying, and
where you'd write like, did you see
or,
so-and-so's dress, or like, what do you think of this person's hair,
or whatever. It can turn into basically the before times, before online bullying, trolling, harassment, because kids are horrible. And it's actually a very dated reference. It goes back to the 1920s.
Do you know why it's called slam book?
I do not.
It's because of the slamming motion that happens when the teacher comes by and sees you writing in it. Yeah, so I found that out. But yeah, I found it very dated. There's apparently a resurgence on TikTok where people are sharing their slam books, and some of them are really innocuous, like, what's your favorite color, and what's your favorite book, and like things like that. But then there are others, and just to really hammer home how insidious it can be, it was actually used in relation to a murder investigation. So it got pretty dark.
Well, I think we missed the boat on that one specifically because we are children of the internet. So we had MySpace and Facebook. Oh, well, Facebook when we were in college, but MySpace was our high school years. for you specifically, and that kind of replaced the slam book because we spent more of our time on our computer at home rather than writing things down.
Yeah. Now, I do want to just say that one of the things that they say about this in the show is they're making kind of a joke about how, oh, maybe she's writing a slam book. Oh, she's just doing the assignment. Basically insinuating she's a goody two-shoes, right?
Yeah.
But I think most of us Gilmore Girls fans can agree that if somebody in the episodes were writing a slam book, Lorelai and Rory would actually be the ones to do it. They make fun of everything and everyone, the pop culture references.
I mean, it wouldn't be a mean-spirited one, but they would certainly have a snarkiness.
There's a lot of snark. And they make fun of quite a bit of music, especially. If they had a music slam book between Rory and Lorelai or Rory and Lane, I would not be shocked by any means. So I just thought it was kind of funny because it's like they talk about how innocent she is, but she's got snark on her. So I just thought that was funny. After the classroom, we are at the Independence Inn, and we learn that Rory got into Chilton. And the way that Lorelai lets her know this is she presents her with a gift, and it is a plaid schoolgirl skirt. And Rory doesn't know what's going on, and she says, am I going to be in a Britney Spears video? So that is our next reference, Britney Spears.
Britney Spears, and then also tied into that is Eminem, kind of.
Which was referenced a little earlier, but we grouped them together.
We're going to group them because it's the same
90s music.
Era of music. 99 to 2000s, it was that time. I remember getting a CD for like my 13th birthday from Britney Spears. And one of my friends tried...
You got the CD?
I was given it by one of my friends.
Oh, okay.
I was not very into music.
Like you put it on your Christmas list.
No.
Like, can I have Baby One More Time, please?
I did not. And it was an unsolicited CD. And one of my other friends tried to steal it for the fold-out poster.
Oh.
Because
was it the one where she's like sitting with her hands in her head?
I honestly can't remember.
Like
it was probably, but it was just very much overly sexualized for 13-year-olds at that point. Like
I wrote this down.
It's kind of too much, too far, and looking back on it as an adult, it's.
Yeah. So I wrote that down because she's saying this because she got a plaid skirt, and anybody in the 90s, if you saw a plaid skirt, you thought of
Britney Spears.
Baby One More Time video, Britney Spears. And now looking back, I know that Britney Spears was a teenager when that video came out.
Yeah.
And she was highly sexualized. Yeah. And even in this show, they slightly sexualize the situation by Lorelai wanting to shorten the skirt. Yep. And it's just kind of some of the references made around this where she, Lorelai had offered to do the headmaster. So there's a lot of like coyness about sexuality, which is fine, but it feels a little weird
it's
for
kind
her
of
age.
It's kind of a very fine line given that she is a mother and she's talking to her daughter, which is kind of inappropriate.
Yeah.
But
there's a little bit of weird feeling looking back.
But then they're also so close because of there's not that much of a significant age difference. There is, but there's not.
Yeah, so I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, I'm older now, so I'm looking back on it, and it's a little bit strange for me, and knowing everything, obviously, that happened with Britney Spears. I mean, we all know it's still happening. It's crazy what's going on with her, that it's just, it's a different look, is all I'll say about that. But we also wanted to bring up Eminem, because it's in the same time period.
Yeah, it's right around the same time, 1999 to 2000s.
Yeah, so Eminem 2000 Slim Shady LP came out. I mean, I was a huge stan.
Who didn't stick? That's a word that came
from Eminem.
Came into
I
existence.
didn't even mean to do it.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, everyone listened to Eminem. Like that's everyone's favorite counterculture, annoy your parents music.
Exactly, and I think that's exactly why Lane referenced it, because she has these really conservative parents who would not understand her needing to kind of break away from that. And it actually made me think, though, so Eminem, I don't know if it was the same in your family, but for my family, and my family was not even that conservative, so I imagine same for yours, they weren't a fan of Eminem, and they didn't understand my liking of him. And I wonder if it's different now, because I mean, I think people have a different opinion of Eminem now. But I'm curious what you think the nowadays version of Eminem would be. Like the person that kids would look at and be like, hey, I really like them, but the parents just don't understand it, and so they push away from that.
I mean, I'm sure it's something that we don't understand because we're well past understanding at this point, but I have
You don't have a guess?
I don't even have any idea.
On the internet, it said Kanye West, and I don't agree with that one. It could be. I still think that's probably a little bit older than now. But what I was thinking is probably Post Malone, because he is, I mean, I'm still not too old to appreciate who he is as a person and how much he connects to his audience, but I do think when you listen to the music, if you're older, especially a parent, you might be a little bit like, ooh, I don't know if I want my kid listening to that.
Yeah.
So that's who I see as kind of being the modern day Eminem, but definitely Eminem was I'm listening to this and I feel like a badass.
Well, the first episode specifically is just nothing but book and music references for the most part. That's where this show is.
And that's what it always ends up being. It's wonderful. Okay, so the next one, we said in episode 1, if you haven't heard, the first episode, please go back and listen to it, that we were going to stretch the definition of what a reference was and really talk about things
just
that pop
random
up.
things.
And we're about to do that for the next 2, so bear with us here.
So this one is Protestants Love Oatmeal. This is Suki trying to help get her into Chilton and set a good impression. I'll make some oatmeal raisin cookies. Protestants love oatmeal. And I think that's, well, it's a tie into Quaker Oats.
We think. We're taking a lot of guesses here. We need to know what this means.
There's some guesswork involved, but I think it's Quaker Oats related. I believe that it's partly related to TV shows we're not really allowed to, at this time, reference specific products or have them on screen.
That's true.
So I think they were trying to get around saying Quaker Oats, but then they said essentially Quaker Oats.
That could be. I thought it was more a reference to the wasps, right? So I don't know, is that really around the country or is that regional? I don't really know. But anyways, what we think of when we think of waspy people is like the really, really rich.
The Gilmores.
The Gilmores, yes, exactly.
The Gilmores.
So when she's going to Chilton, she's going to come in contact with those type of people, and stereotypically, they were Protestant. I don't know if that's still true
They're
today.
also very boring.
Yeah, I don't know if all of that is still true today, but it definitely was in the 90s. That was the stereotype. You can take it or leave it as being positive or negative, but that's what it was. And I was thinking she was more alluding to that because that's kind of the vibe I got from the scene.
So the other part of it, I do think that there is historical reference for, Quakers in Connecticut specifically. It's another tie to the region. Mm-hmm. So in Massachusetts, there's a long-standing, not very polite tradition of tolerance, given that we were originally puritanical, and there's the Crucible and the Salem witch trial and persecuting people that don't think like you. So Quakers were not well received in Massachusetts, so they kind of stayed on the south side in Connecticut rather than moving into Massachusetts. So I think it's partly another region setting reference as well.
So you think that they said oatmeal to reference Quaker Oats to reference, this is a circle.
Yes.
Interesting. So this is a very loaded...
This whole thing is so interconnected and twisted and just like tied into itself. It's a knot within a knot that you have to untangle, but there's no way.
I mean, I guess. This should have been one of Kirk's shirts when later on in the show he does those pithy one-liners. It's like Babette ate oatmeal. It should have been Protestants. But
that should have been a callback to the original pilot.
Totally should have been. I mean, maybe Babette was supposed to be a Protestant. I don't know, but just very, very strange. If anybody has any context, I don't know if any writers from the show happen to come across this at some point in your life and you have context for this joke, I need to know because this one it just bothers me. But this is another thing. The next reference is something that really bothers you.
Oh, this one is... Well, first off, the continuity is a problem because they changed the photo behind the front desk like 5 times.
Yeah, so we are moving into the Independence Inn and we are looking at Michelle. And we mentioned in episode 1 of this podcast that the frame behind Michelle was supposed to be a scary guy with a powdered wig or something like that.
Knickers? Yeah.
In knickers, right. Yeah. And it had like little stars on it, but we couldn't see the frame. Well, now we're in the same shot and you see 2 different photos behind him.
Yeah.
One of which we can see, and the other one we took a lot of time
We
to try
found
and
out
see
both of them. So the first one is very clearly George Washington.
Yeah, very obviously. Totally makes sense for Independence
Inn. It's
makes sense.
Revolutionary War, like that's gotcha. Same page, consistent.
Yeah, we got it.
Logical. The second one, this is the one that we had to Google image. We had to...
It took us a very long time.
It took us days, probably, I think. It was a long time.
Actually first learned about this existing on one of those reference sites where they're cataloging everything, and the person said, I noticed George Washington, there's another frame there, but I can't see it. And I was like, okay, challenge accepted.
Yeah.
And we did. And we figured this out.
It is the person that no one would expect. Robert E. Lee. Explain to me how Robert E. Lee is in Connecticut, given the circumstances of him fighting against Connecticut in the Civil War.
Yeah,
it
so
does not make sense.
In case you're not a history buff like my husband, let's just give you a little bit of context that Robert E. Lee was the general of the Confederate Army.
Correct.
So I just want to clarify that Connecticut, obviously, was not even part of the Confederate Army. In fact, was the enemy of the Confederate Army.
Yes.
So I just wanted to clarify.
All of New England got shot at the Confederate Army.
Not everyone is a history buff, so let's make sure we're all in the same place. Now, George Washington was not in the Confederate Army.
No.
So let's just...
Do we think that that's problematic in terms of the name of the inn? Because it's the Independence Inn. He was fighting for...
Independence from...
the United States?
Yeah, I don't know.
Do we think that's an accident? Intentional?
So I think that they literally were looking for scary guys in powdered wigs with knickers, and they just found this photo and didn't know who it was. That's what I think.
I think they were looking for historical portraits. I think it had more to do with the subdued color palette and blending into the background. But if they picked that on purpose, then that's horrible. So I very much hope this is an accident and not intentional done by the set pieces. I think it was making it look old and quaint and quintessentially New England versus what it actually represents.
Yeah, and I think we'll be able to see more of how intentional it was when we get to episode 2, because for anybody that doesn't know, the pilot episode was filmed in Canada, and then when they started filming this in California on the studio lot, they tried to replicate the sets as much as they could, but you'll see a lot of differences, and we'll talk about them. And I'm really curious if these paintings come over, because I definitely wasn't really keying in on that when I was watching the show in my million rewatches. That was not something I was focused on. So if Robert E. Lee shows up in episode 2, I'm going with intentional. I
mean, that is worrisome. And also, why is Robert E. Lee in Canada?
I don't know. I've got no answers.
I mean, why is George Washington in Canada, honestly? But neither here nor there.
No, neither here nor there. I have no idea, but I would love to know. So if anybody has any information about why this was, we need to know, because it's very, very stressful. So the next reference, we leave the Independence Inn and we are in Lorelai's home, and she is talking to Chilton on the phone, upset about the fact that there's a lot of zeros behind that 5, and
it's panicking.
Yeah,
it's college tuition.
The tuition in the time frame that they need it, and she's really freaking out. And she says, "This doesn't give me a lot of time to pull a bank job." And I don't honestly know if I picked up when I was first watching the show that a bank job was a robbery. I honestly don't know if I caught that. I obviously... Well, I think she talked so fast.
She does talk fast. I mean, that's a very New England thing, again, and well done.
I don't know anybody who talks that fast. No idea.
Yeah.
But you didn't have captions back then, so you weren't necessarily catching every word.
And you missed it, there's no going back.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was very much you had to pay attention for this show.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to think about, did she actually, in her mind, pull a bank job because she had to go to her parents and do something as horrible in her mind as robbing a bank?
I mean, I think that to her, a bank job would have been preferable, because at least she wouldn't have had to stoop to going to her parents. And it's definitely understandable as the show goes on as to why she would resist this, but it's
I mean, to be fair, in the pilot, they're significantly worse as parents than they are later on. They're not great, but they're even more exaggeratedly awful in the pilot.
I've got thoughts, but we won't get there at this point. But we've actually used this reference previously in our lives.
Yes, you had an idea to do a series of Gilmore Girls inspired date nights with different dinners and activities and all of those things, because you're so obsessed with Gilmore Girls. You watch it all of the time.
Yeah.
All of the time. So you had literally wanted to have the activity be a bank job, which is basically just Gilmore Girls trivia from the pilot episode where you sit down and watch Gilmore Girls together and then have a set list of questions, and whoever wins gold coins or the chocolate
coins.
The chocolate
we
coins.
were eating recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were literally going to do this. We actually made some TikToks. We actually made TikToks related to it. We had a whole outfit. I was wearing black and white stripes. Like, we had a whole thing going on.
Looking like the old-timey prison escapee in the stripes, yeah.
Yeah, we had a whole thing, but it didn't pan out for us. It didn't work out. But if you want to have a Bankjob date night after listening to this, yeah, that's what we did.
We have it written down somewhere. You can ask us.
We even have all of the trivia. Like, we have all of it. So, yeah, it was a fun time. But I think that one definitely resonates as her realizing how dire her situation is and that she would think about that before going to her parents. But the next reference also talks about this, and I have some questions about this. So the next reference is Stephen King, which for anybody in New England, we always like kind of feel like he's our author. Like, he's obviously super famous and whatever, but he is from Maine, and
Portland, in fact. Yeah. So it's not even that far away. It's only about 2 hours.
Right. And I don't know about you, but I know growing up, I found it amazing to like sneak one of the Stephen King books and read it when my parents were like, that's a horror book and you should not be reading it. But I absolutely did that.
Well, it's another author reference, and he's integral to... He's Stephen King. He's a Sox fan. Like, he is...
He is New England.
Yeah.
So that I think that's why it's here. But I had a question for you. So her quote is, there are several chapters from a Stephen King novel I'd reenact before resorting to that, in reference to going to her parents to get money. What, if you were to guess, what Stephen King novel do you think she would reenact chapters from?
There's only one.
Oh, which one are you going with?
It's Misery.
Oh, okay, because like, what do I have here? What
Misery. It's Misery.
Absolutely. Yeah. And now, do you think that she is envisioning taking the headmaster and reenacting Misery on him until he agrees to allow her in so she doesn't have to go to her parents? Or how are we envisioning this?
No, I think she would willingly have someone bash her own legs to pieces legs. So that she didn't have to go, so she was confined to a bed and could never leave. I think she very much wanted with every fiber of her being not to have to go to Hartford.
So she chose to have the violence inflicted upon her versus being the inflictor.
Correct. She wanted to...
She's not Kathy Bates.
No, she is James Caan in that.
Gotcha. So if you don't know what Misery is, I'll just quickly let you know that basically Kathy Bates' character, which in the movie, just because it's easier to reference the movie, Kathy Bates' character is obsessed with this author, and so obsessed that she kidnaps him and ties him to a bed and then tortures him in saying that it's because she's obsessed with him and loves him and doesn't want to lose him.
So if she breaks his legs, he can never leave. He cannot walk out and escape, basically.
Right.
It's...
So in my brain, Lorelai was saying that she would do this to the headmaster in order for him to then allow Rory to go into school. And you're saying you think that she would allow someone to do that to her so she would never have to do it.
I think she wants to be the one that is subjected to that, even though it's horrible, so that she has an excuse not to have to go to her parents.
I mean, that's totally fair. Now, there are plenty of Stephen King novels. Like the other one I thought that you might reference was Carrie and being on stage and having the blood pour over her. There's plenty of other Stephen King novels that they could be referencing, but I am really curious what people think she's referencing here. Like, what novel? If you think it's a specific novel.
It's got to be Misery, in my mind. I did, related to Stephen King, find it really odd that he wrote a book about a murderous car.
Oh, I loved that book.
Christine?
Yes, I've actually read the book and seen the movie, which is very rare for me. I usually do one or the other.
Yeah, you have a whole list of books to read because they have movies and movies to see because you've read the book. But he got hit by a car after he wrote that book.
Oh.
Like, he got hit...
After, not before. So he didn't write a murderous car because he got hit by a car.
Yeah. Stephen King got struck by a minivan 5-6 years after the fact.
Interesting.
And it's just, it's a weird kind of kismet kind of coincidence.
Interesting. So, at this point in the show, Lorelai and Suki are, like, standing on the porch discussing, like, what to do. And I guess, like, Stephen King makes sense because it's relevant to New England, and it's also, there's many torture things you can pick from here. But she's really deciding whether or not it's worth it. And at this point in the show, you haven't met the parents yet. So I'm curious because you're a first-time watcher. Well, you're basically a first-time watcher with me. When you first saw this, did you anticipate the parents being the way that they are? Or did you have like a different vision of who the parents would be?
So I went in blind, blind, and I didn't really have a vision in my head yet of any of the other characters, because watching it for the first time or the second time maybe, I'm still trying to wrap my head and get embedded in the show a little bit. So I'm still finding my bearings. I'm still trying to settle in, and it's different because I go into it without the bias, without the prejudgment of the parents, even though they're in the pilot episode, the parents are the worst they will ever be in the show.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I feel like just the way that everything is set up, especially at this point in the show, you're really expecting these awful humans. That Lorelai has obviously cut contact with them. She obviously doesn't like them, so much so that she doesn't want to ask them for help with something that clearly her daughter really cares about.
Right.
So you're really picturing like these, well, at least to me, these awful people, these monsters, and I can really relate to what she's going through in this, in the way that Lorelai feels, but I definitely think that we're truly seeing this from Lorelai's lens entirely, because she is really exaggerating how awful it is. While I imagine it is this awful to her, to everybody looking on, I don't think it's as bad.
I just really like the context, because I don't know if they threw her out or she left or they're just...
I mean, you know now.
Well, now I do.
Yeah.
Yes. But going into it, it was just it was kind of still, what is going on exactly? Why is she so reluctant to ask her parents for help? It didn't click in my mind that it would be that bad.
Now, is there any way that you would let pride get in the way of you helping your child if they needed it? Like in this situation, Rory won't be able to go to school if she doesn't ask for help. And I mean, we do learn that it is pride that is standing in her way. There is baggage, but pride is the ultimate thing that stands in her way.
I mean, she sets aside her pride. I would like to think that I would be a better person than Richard and Emily, in that I wouldn't leverage that into an artificial relationship, which we will cover at length at some point.
I'm sure.
But it is something that I can understand being hurt that your own kid and your grandchild are not in your life, and you've kind of lost that part of your life, in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, we will really get into the parent side of things, because
deservedly so you lost it, but you can feel hurt even if it is your fault, because people have this wonderful ability to compartmentalize and blame other people for their own failing.
Yeah, I mean, we will really get into the grandparent side of things when we meet them. I have some feelings about that. I'm sure you know that.
Oh yes.
But I think from Lorelai's perspective, it feels like stepping backwards. It feels like she worked so hard to do all of this on her own and, fight against everything that she came away from, and then still has to go back because there's just no other way. It feels like taking a step back. Yeah. And I can very much relate to that feeling.
Well, she very much at that point in her life had become a success. She's pulled herself up by her bootstraps, which...
Ugh.
Is the worst thing to say, but she went out on her own.
She did it.
All of these adult responsibilities as a child or a teenager, and she's come out the other side, and her life is finally at a point where she's feeling like it has a handle on things and she's in a good place. But then this comes along.
Yeah, and you just feel for her in this moment, and I don't know if anybody else has been in that situation, but if you have, you know how this feels.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still paying my student loans right now. I'm almost 40, and I still have student loans. It's insane.
Yeah, they never go away. It's a terrible thing. Yeah. But, all right, so our last reference, and this is the only reference in this show that, this is the only reference in this specific episode that I had no context for. Like, I knew the name, but I couldn't relate it to anything. So this is Zsa Zsa Gabor. Now, I don't even think this is the only time they reference Zsa Zsa Gabor, but I definitely know I had no idea what it was in the show. And I just thought rich. That was what I thought when I heard the show. That's what it sounded like. In context clues, that's what you think of.
Yeah.
But did you know who this was before this episode?
I had heard the name. I hadn't actually cared to look into who she was specifically. Well before my time. This is a very dated reference.
Yeah, it is a really dated reference, actually.
She's famous from like the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah.
So well before our time. I know I don't look that young, but that's well before my time.
So the context for this is they are inside the house. They are... Lorelai is hemming up Rory's skirt, and Suki is looking to get something to eat, and she's looking in the fridge, and she says to Lorelai, "Where's your pate?" And Lorelai says, "At Zsa Zsa Gabor's house." So first of all, we have to address the elephant in the room.
You didn't know what pate was.
I did not. No, well, I mean, so I Googled it, and I looked at pictures, and it looks disgusting.
Yeah.
It's like spreadable and a weird, like almost orangey color. It was just horrifying to look at. Like, no thank you. Why do you think Suki was looking for pate?
Because she's a refined chef palate. So she just
wanted casual pate?
Yeah, she wanted some sophisticated taste because she's a chef. It's
Have you ever had pate?
No. Oh, no.
Would you like to tell people what it is?
It's basically mushy goose liver in a spreadable, cold, kind of on a cracker. It's awful.
Do you normally have it on a cracker? Is that like the typical way?
No, I don't have it at all.
Yeah,
no.
It doesn't sound good. And I believe when Laura said at Zsa Zsa Gabor's house, she means we're not rich. We don't have that stuff around here. Like that's an opulent type thing. That's kind of the vibe
That's my
I got.
parents would have.
Yeah.
Pate and foie gras and all of those.
Yes.
Additionally, obscenely.
We eat Pop-Tarts around this joint, not pate.
Yeah. Cereal, Pop-Tarts, junk, like, I'm there for that. Down. Yep.
Yeah.
Pizza, beer, like, yeah. Salt of the earth, hamburgers.
Yeah, I cannot picture them sitting on the couch watching TV, eating pate and crackers.
Oh, no.
Just horrifying. And I mean, Suki's recipes get more relatable as the show goes on. I feel like because there are some of them that are a little bit like, oh, that's weird. But
the peach sauce, the infamous peach sauce from
this episode, I think we're gonna have to go and find. There is an Instagram account, if you guys don't know about it, called Eating Gilmore, and they went through and did a recipe from every single episode. And for this pilot episode, they did the peach sauce. And I feel like for science. We need to go and try that out and put it on some waffles or some ice cream or I don't know, both.
Cobbler.
Yeah.
Or.
So like, if you guys think that we should do that, I think you guys should tell us that. But Zsa Zsa Gabor. So I do think that the reference here is Lorelai is referencing opulence and referencing just the fanciness. So I don't know a lot about Zsa Zsa Gabor, but from what I could tell, she was a socialite from...
Socialite actress. She was someone who was well-to-do that lived in Hollywood.
Had quite a few husbands.
9, in fact. 9.
Really?
9.
And she had a quote that said something like, "I like manly men, and not just in appearance. I like manly men that can treat a woman right. I don't just like muscles." And I was like, that's an interesting thing to say.
Well, she also had a rather witty retort of, "I'm an excellent housekeeper. Anytime I leave my husband, I keep the house."
Nice. So she's snarky too. Yeah. We're really layering that snarky because this show is really snarky.
She's very much the whole husbands are like Kleenex from Clue. You just dispose of, you get a new husband.
I mean, get it, girl. I mean, especially for her time period, get it.
She married the Hiltons, so she was related to that family.
So that's dicey. Did you read about that situation?
I did not.
So I'm not going to say all the words because I don't want people to get triggered here. However, one of the Hiltons was one of her husbands. She had a kid with him, her only kid. Yes. And I'll just say it was against her will. So that is not great, but I do think it is a good way to think of who she was then by looking at who the Hiltons are now. Because if you think of Paris Hilton, do you not
it's
think
basically that, but from the 1930s.
Yeah, so you think of Paris Hilton, you think of opulence, and, they've got everything, the flashy cars, the money, the jewelry, they got it all. and that's what she had for her day. So I do think that connection is really a good one to make in this time period, but just understanding that relationship was complicated and not great. Yeah.
Now, Zsa Zsa Gabor is tangentially related to me.
How? Are you Tyler Gabor and I didn't know it?
I am not. So in 1989, she slapped a police officer at a traffic stop.
She slapped a police officer? Did she get arrested?
I don't think she did because she's
Zsa Zsa Gabor.
Yeah, she's famous and rich, and rich people never face consequences for things, with few exceptions. But the officer that she slapped was Paul Kramer.
Wow.
No relation, but spelled the same way. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So basically, you were tangentially slapped by Zsa Zsa Gabor. Is that what you're
I think that the transitive property means that I was slapped directly in the face.
Is this like what is the Kevin Bacon thing? It's like
7 degrees of separation.
7 degrees of Zsa Zsa Gabor.
Basically.
So basically you were slapped by Zsa Zsa Gabor. I feel like that's something that you can now tell everybody, and nobody will understand the reference, but you've got it now.
Yeah.
So that is all of the ones for this section. I can't believe that we are only approximately halfway through
through the pilot.
episode.
This is going to be the rest of our lives.
Yeah, and honestly though, I'm so excited to keep this going because I have never, in my quest to get through all the references in the show, even made it through the pilot. There will be, as we go along, there will be other things that I can reference and talk about that we've done in our life because we live in New England, so things organically pop up.
Are going to continually pop up.
Yeah, and there are things that just kind of creeped into my life. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's from Gilmore Girls. We should do it. But like actually going through the list one by one, I've never made it through the pilot because, as you can tell, there is a million.
How would you have gotten? It's taking us weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, we could do a whole separate podcast of actually reading all the books from the show and like going through that rabbit hole, which, my goodness, exactly, that is how I feel.
Darling, I don't think that if we did nothing else, that's a full-time job.
It is. I mean, I'm down for a full-time job.
The list of books from this show is a full-time commitment.
So if anyone wants to make me a professional Gilmore Girls
book reader,
yeah, I mean, I'm in. So I'm here. But so we still have 2 more probably podcast episodes for the pilot alone, which is insane.
Yeah.
But I am curious what you guys are thinking of these references. If you have anything you want to add or you think we've missed anything that we should have pointed out in the show.
2 minute 18, I want to point that out. 2 minute halfway in the show. If we've missed something, please let us know.
Yeah, I mean, there is one glaring thing that I haven't mentioned, and I'm curious if anyone can point it out, but there is a picture on a fireplace that I'm curious if anybody picked up on as being a little bit strange in the Gilmore house, and maybe we'll talk about that in the next episode, just to see if anybody gets it right. But I'm curious, if you saw a frame in Lorelai's house, picture frame that seemed a little bit weird for Lorelai and Rory to have based on the whole show, I would like to know what you guys think. But that is everything we have, so come back next week for episode 3.
Thank you all for listening.